My name is Jake. I am 29 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I am shunned.
All right, Jake. So how did you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place?
I was born and raised. My family goes back, I want to say 4 generations. So my great grandparents were in it. If I'm counting my generations correctly, I think that's right.
Well, it depends on your definition of a generation.
That's right. It's very subjective. We've come to know. So yeah, really just one overlapping generation when you think about it. No, yeah. So I was born into it, and it was just kind of like joining the family business in a way. There was never any real question. It was just my mom. We didn't go to preschool. My mom taught us, before we went to elementary school, and I just remember learning to read from the Bible story books and everything like that. So, yeah, it was just always a part of me from a very young age.
So it goes back really far. Do you know the origin of it in your family? Do you know what somebody was? A lot of times, it was after a war, somebody was going through some stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The farthest back that I know of was my great grandfather's cousin, I believe. And he had a life experience written about him in the Awake magazine. So you can look up his whole deal. He was a scientist actually for like NASA. He was like literally a rocket scientist and developed patents for them. So he was a genius guy. And I don't think there was any kind of tragedy that befell them. It just kind of seemed like maybe there was a sort of lacking of wanting something more. Back then, being religious was way more a part of the culture, especially Christianity. And so I think, being dissatisfied maybe with the mainstream Christianity at the time, he was very struck by learning that God's name was Jehovah. I remember that, like the article in the Awake, I think is entitled something like "A Scientist Makes His Greatest Discovery." The greatest discovery being, not all these rocket fuel things he developed, but God's name. So I think that was the thing for him. But yeah, and it's interesting now that I talk about that. I never associated, my faith with anything kind of like tragic, really. And it never really seemed to touch on those points for anybody else. Like, it was not like, oh, we had just lost so-and-so in the family, and all of a sudden we got a knock on the door. It always just kind of seemed like it was there in my life. And I think for me, that made me feel like it was maybe a little bit less manipulative than it actually was. You know what I mean? Because it just kind of seemed like, oh, this is just a family religion. Nothing weird about this. So I never associated it with that kind of grief poaching that seems to happen.
Grief poaching. I like that. Yes, absolutely. Preying on vulnerabilities. I can see, if it's just something that you've always had, there was no big defining moment that changed it necessarily for you, or that brought, a change that brought it into your life, let's say. So I can understand that. I was also thinking about what did you say, it was your great grandfather's cousin or whatever, being a rocket scientist.
Yeah.
You ever seen, is it Brian Regan? He's a comedian, and he has a set, "I Walked on the Moon." And it's like, well, once you've walked on the moon, your story kind of trumps everybody else's story.
Yes.
And you got to think, a rocket scientist might get kind of restless.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think that's true. That's a really good point. And, like, he was quite notable in the area. And I think he might have made it up to your area, actually, in Indiana. Because before, now we have, not we, but, witnesses have circuit overseers. They used to have district overseers, basically these, men who travel, check in on the different congregations. But before they even had a name for them, they had traveling overseers, and he was one of them. And so he just traveled all over Ohio. I think he might have made it to Indiana and Kentucky as well. So growing up, my dad was an elder. My grandfather was an elder. They would give talks. I'd travel with them, listen to their talks, and invariably there would always be an old timer there that would say, "Okay, how are you related to Nelson?" That was his name. And you know how Sunday talks can be. Usually, right after they're done, it's out of your brain forever. They're pretty unremarkable, but like he was a remarkable speaker. Apparently, he really made an impact on people. Like they would come and say, yeah, I remember Nelson. He gave this talk back in 1962 and he brought out this point, blah, blah, blah. And so that was just always very striking to us. He definitely cast a wide shadow over the family and made me feel like I was a part of this large legacy in the organization.
Your spiritual heritage, I believe.
Yes.
Term that they've kind of coined.
Oh, yes. I heard that quite a bit. Yeah. That I was part of a great spiritual heritage.
Yeah. Creates a lot of pressure. So
yeah.
You growing up in it, what was the worldview that it gave you? How did it make you see yourself and the people around you?
Yeah. I think that there is just this dichotomy of like, when you're at school, that's kind of not the real world in a way. Like when you're at school, you're in Satan's world, and those aren't really your friends. And the things you're learning are important, but they're not as important as what you're learning at the meetings. So, I wasn't like antisocial, and I didn't necessarily feel like an outcast in school, but I definitely felt different, and people were aware that I was different, and I looked at them differently because I was told to. So now I'll say that I didn't have the outlook that they were going to all be destroyed in Armageddon, because that was not something that I don't think anybody in my family believed that, even though it's definitely something that's taught in the publications. Jumping ahead, when I first started doing research into older publications and just seeing all of these quotes about people dying in Armageddon other than witnesses, it was really shocking to me because I had just somehow trained my eyes to just glance over that stuff. So I never felt that kind of like superiority over classmates, but I definitely felt different and kind of like that was just a whole other world. So I think that was probably more of the worldview that like, yeah, when you're at the meetings or when you're with your spiritual family or your family that are witnesses, that's you really living, that's you really existing. And everything else, you're just like in this weird limbo waiting to get to the next spiritual whatever.
Yeah. Don't they even use the term, I can't remember where they find it in the Bible, like the real life? Reaching out,
get a firm hold on the real life.
Yeah, firm hold on the real life, and so they say these things that make you think that what you have is the real life or their hashtag best life ever, right? So
yeah,
they coin certain terminologies and really reinforce those to make you feel like, yeah, your life at the Kingdom Hall and with your spiritual family, that is the real life. Everything else is fake.
Yeah, and of course it's a self-fulfilling prophecy when you're told, you're no part of the world, and those, these people at school, they're living in Satan's world. They don't have Jehovah, as witnesses would say. So of course you feel like they're different, and you feel like you're different, and you feel like you don't really fit in with them because you're told not to fit in with them and that you shouldn't fit in with them and that they wouldn't get along with you well anyway. And that if you get close to them, they probably have some ulterior motives. So of course you feel more comfortable at the one place in your life where you're not ostracized. But I didn't view it like that at the time.
Yeah. It makes me think, there's a lot of people that after leaving Jehovah's Witnesses really struggle to make friends. And you just said why.
Yeah.
you just highlighted why, because we were made to feel so different, to not trust others, to think that they wouldn't like us anyway, even if they got to know us, to feel awkward around them. These are the reasons that that's part of the manipulation that keeps you set apart, so that you don't even look at the possibility of having friends in this, world, as they,
Yeah.
this separate world. Um, so so that touches on school a little bit for you. What was like for you at home growing up? What was your family like?
Yeah. I mean, I was blessed with a really loving family. I mean, I had a great family life. Our family was close and very big. It goes back 4 generations in the organization. And my dad was the oldest of 8. And then most of his brothers and sisters had kids of their own. So I grew up with a bunch of cousins and aunts and uncles, all of whom were witnesses. And, most of whom, when they were old enough, became servants, elders, went to Bethel, so on and so forth. Um, so it just, I don't know, like the being close to the organization was something that phrase, being close to the organization, that was something that was stressed a lot. Um, and so that was all very positive. I felt at the time, I felt like I had this really, and I had a very loving, kind family, and they were funny, and they were also very like sardonic and open about differing opinions. And I think that's kind of important. Um, Kind of the matriarch of our family, my great grandmother, she was very funny and she was very much an independent thinker. And if she saw something in the, watchtower that she didn't agree with, she would she would say something about it, and it would start a larger family conversation. And obviously we would all come back to the predetermined conclusion, the one that we were supposed to have. But there was a lot of spirited discussions, and we would make fun of cheesy pictures in the publications, things like that. Like, I don't know, there was just a sense of humor about everything, to the point where I never felt stifled, or that it was like a stuffy, like humorless religion, which I think it was for a lot of people. And you can definitely, I sensed it going to basically any other Kingdom Hall. I think I had a pretty unique upbringing in that way. Um, Now, a big part of my childhood that I haven't gotten into yet was that when I was 8 years old, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I was sick for a couple of years before that. They just kept thinking that I like kept getting the flu, but it got pretty severe. It affects your digestive system, and so I was severely underweight. It was affecting my growth and development, and I was in and out of the hospital a lot. And so the hope of paradise was incredibly important, because Crohn's does not have a cure. It can go into remission, but it doesn't go away. So I was sick a lot. I was in the hospital a lot, and we would get a lot of visitors from the congregation, from my family. So all of those things reinforced from a young age, like, this is where help and solace is, and this is where hope is. The paradise. That's the one way you're ever going to really feel better. So those were all pretty formative things.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. The You talked a little bit about the loving atmosphere in your family and the spirited discussions around the truth and everything.
Mm-hmm.
What was the temperature like, though? I mean, did you all go have fun? Did what was the temperature of the room, so to speak? Obviously, it was loving around the truth, but
Yeah.
did you all make time to go have fun as a family? Did you all do other things, or was it mainly centered around organizational activities?
That's a good question. We would take a family vacation every year. Actually, twice a year, once in the summer, one in the winter, and that was always very fun. So that was just vacation with family. But at the same time, so we would like go to Canada every year as a family. But we did our Bible reading after dinner, and we had our Watchtower study. So the spiritual routine stayed, but it was definitely super fun. I mean, I have a lot of really fond memories there, lots of laughter and playing games. So there was a lot of fun. I think the thing that like, yeah, I think back to, you said that I have fun, and I'm like, yeah, when did I have fun as a kid? I'm trying to think here, and um, I just I feel like I never really knew how I fit in as a person with all these other witness kids, with worldly kids or witness kids. And it wasn't that I felt that I was better or that there was something wrong with them, but I just, around certain people, I could be really social and I felt like I could be myself and I could be funny. But around basically anybody else, I always felt really in my head about everything. So there was a lot of, kind of arranged play dates, how parents will do, like, you're just going to be friends with this person now, go over to their house, and always feeling like, oh, their family's a little weirder than my family, or, they're a little bit more strict about this. And I do think it emphasized to me that our more loosey-goosey, jovial approach to the organization was not necessarily the norm for a lot of people. And so I never felt super tight with people other than my family for a while, until I was probably a teenager and was able to venture out on my own and make friends and, just like do normal stuff like go to the movies and
Yeah.
have people over to play video games.
Yeah, those are the things that, make up a lot of the experience of a family, say a normal non-cult raised family,
Yeah.
just families sitting around playing games or going out to a park or going and meeting new people or having friends over or going to the movie, whatever. Those are the things that I like to find out, did people do those things? And then also, what was the emotional temperature of the room, or of a family, because sometimes you have these families that are very spiritual, but you can't ask mom or dad a question without getting a 3 hour long lecture from the Bible, right?
Right.
That's not super healthy, and it's just interesting to see where we all come from and how JW focused we get, even in our conversations around these things a lot of times,
Yeah.
because that's what our whole life revolved around, was witness activities.
Yeah, we did do a lot of that stuff. We had a pretty, like you said, other than the cult stuff, we
Yeah.
had a pretty fun, normal family situation. And I think that's something that has been a wake up call to me, is seeing how incredibly unique my upbringing was, and really the culture around the very specific area where I lived, and maybe even just that congregation was like, there was just kind of this vibe where you take the truth seriously, but nobody is overly serious about it. Like, there was a sense, like there was almost a casualness about it. And I was talking to somebody recently that kind of compared it to just like the Sunday churchgoer attitude, where it's like, yes, you are a Catholic, you go to church every Sunday, you wear a cross, but is that dominating every single conversation that you have throughout the week until church day comes? No. And I think it was obviously a much bigger deal than that in my family, because it was, service is mandatory. You're going to the meetings no matter what. But there never was an oppressive attitude about it. And I think that allowed me to overlook a lot of the more like oppressive aspects of the religion, just because it was presented to me with a different, more laid back attitude that you only realize isn't laid back when you start to like step away from it or have different opinions.
Yeah. It's it sounds nice, to someone who grew up in maybe a more oppressive environment. It sounds nice, but I also then realized that on the back end, then you just have the contrast of, everything seemed loving and kind and wonderful, but then uh-oh, somebody questioned a little too much or a little too far. And now all of a sudden there's a large contrast. Whereas for me, I
Yeah.
knew as soon as I started questioning, I was screwed. Like I just knew this is over. Like there was going to be no love. There wasn't much love anyway. It was going to be a quick cutting off and be pretty much done. I just knew that's how it was going to go.
Well, it's funny you say that because yeah, I had that same feeling, and I'm sure we'll get into what those steps
Yeah.
were that led to that conclusion. But it all ends the same way. No matter if you had a really good experience like I did, or whether you had an incredibly oppressive and negative experience. That's one of the things that gets me when I listen to your show is people who had these just miserable upbringings, who experienced abuse, whose parents were not loving in any kind of traditional sense of the word, but they still stuck with it and it still ends the same way. And that's what's so crazy. I feel very lucky to have had a lot of really good, memories with my family, but now so much of that is soured because as soon as I realized how I felt, and as soon as I realized that there's only one way out, I was like, well, I know what's going to happen. I grew up with disfellowshipped family members, and we didn't talk to them, so I knew how it was going to be. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's just an eventuality that a lot of people try to avoid, and
Yeah.
it typically ends up getting there over time. It's really hard to not eventually upset the apple cart unless you just happen to have one of those families that will still talk to you regardless, which is a
Yeah.
rarity, but it occasionally happens. I mean, some people just fade and get shunned just because they're not going to meetings anymore or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So you don't even have. I was shunned before I was officially out. There's a
Yep.
lot of people who hit that place. So that shunned, that is part of the DNA of the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses, and eventually that seems to be where most people end up on some level, and no matter what our experience was leading up to that. So it is interesting. So you kind of just briefly touched on it at the meetings and such. Um, you talked about it kind of being like this thing you do, but it doesn't dominate your life, so to speak. But did you enjoy the meetings then growing up in that kind of an atmosphere? Did you like the meetings or service, or what was your experience doing those things?
Yeah, that's another thing I've been trying to figure out and just trying to like process my own experiences. Like, did I like any of that? I don't know. Because home life and like doing family study and something like my parents always, they were fun to talk to. And I liked, we had fun conversation. It was not super rigid. So I always liked that stuff. And I always liked when, the whole family would be together and we would do like a Bible reading or something. But, I never really liked the meetings. I never could really pay attention. I have ADHD. And so I would doodle. Yeah. The struggles. I would doodle, I would draw. And I think what really saved me was, becoming appointed a servant. Um, I started reaching out, as they say, at a pretty young age. And so I always had something to do, whether it was carrying microphones or adjusting stage or getting other people ready for their assignments. And obviously then when you're appointed as a ministerial servant, that just multiplies. And what you realize when all that stuff goes away, like I stepped down from being a servant when I realized it wasn't the truth. You realize how much you've insulated yourself from having to think about any of it by just being so busy. And I think that's how I coped with it, because I had a really hard time paying attention. I think just because like there's just not much there. It's the same stuff every week. There's not much substance to it. And I think that's why it's so significant. Like when you do hear a talk that like brought out something you never heard before, because you're like, whoa, that never happened. I never hear something I didn't know before, even though it's supposed to be the opposite. You're supposed to be learning something every week. So yeah, and I definitely never liked service. I tried to pioneer a few years ago, and I just it didn't stick. I didn't like it. I liked the social aspect of it, kind of, but I'm also not the most social guy in the world. So I don't know. I liked being of use to the congregation. And that's when I really did enjoy the meetings. Was I liked being able to, help the older brothers and sisters with their tablets or whatever. Or, I liked being constantly reassured that I was doing something useful. That stuff I did enjoy, but just the actual like sitting and processing information, that did not ever really impact me in a, I don't know, any kind of like spiritually transcendent way.
Well, yeah, let's face it. They had to have talks and Watchtower articles and things about Jehovah's reminders because they knew that this was just repetitive.
Yeah, reminders about how we need reminders.
Yeah, reminders of why we should have the reminders.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so they knew what they were doing, and they knew that it was repetitive, and it was, and that's why anytime new light came out, it was like such a huge deal because
Yeah.
and I remember like there were conventions where they would say that there was some sort of new light that was going to come out. All of us obviously thought that it was like the date for Armageddon.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's what we were all looking forward to, right? But it was usually just some absolutely nothing burger,
Yeah.
where it was like, I don't know. I kind of thought that's how it was anyway. I didn't realize that we didn't think that. Like,
that's so fun. Yes, that is always what we said. Like whenever there was some kind of new teaching, I remember like my mom or my dad would be like, I kind of felt like that's already what we thought. Because usually it was a pretty minor thing. By the time I was growing up and you were, it was not like it was in the early days of the religion up through the 70s where you might get a date for Armageddon, and they might have to clarify like, oh, actually, remember when we said 1975 was the end? It was just the end of 6,000 years of human history. So like we weren't getting that kind of stuff. It was all just like the locusts mentioned in Revelation means this. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, I didn't really care about that anyway. So every once in a while you would get like, oh, the meaning of this king mentioned in Daniel is this. And you'd be like, whoa. But then you step back and be like, but wait, how does that impact my life at all? I guess it doesn't really. But yeah, it's funny. Yeah, the conventions really were, that was so much of the excitement surrounding them. Was not just, this is a big social gathering and that's exciting, but you get to dress up and, if you're single, like I was for, until very recently, you're like trying to look your best and meet some ladies or whatever. It was like, this is an Apple launch event. They're going to release the new software. They're going to show us what the new light is. And that was always such a big, exciting part of it.
yeah, it really was. That was the thing that I looked forward to, I think, was trying to get something new. Because I was just so desperate for anything to stimulate my poor ADHD brain that was tired of listening to the same stuff. It's like going out in service, I never read a Watchtower Awake magazine. I could just read the title and tell you what it said. It said the same thing every other article on that subject said.
I'm so comforted to hear you say that because I genuinely, like, eventually, like, when there was more of a focus on, like, those tracts, the kind of, like, longer, thinner tracts, I almost exclusively used those because, I felt like I never actually read the Watchtower and Awake because I just like, I know what it says. It always says the same thing. This one's about, living a healthy life. This one's about families. This one's about Armageddon or the kingdom. It's like, yeah, I know. It's not going to like shock me. No one's going to point something out in the magazine like, whoa, what?
Or it's Christmas time, and this magazine is about why Christmas is wrong and bad.
Yeah. It's never going to be like, whoa, hang on. This one actually says Christmas is okay. What?
Yeah. You knew what they were going to be about.
Right.
Same regurgitated information.
But I felt so guilty about that too. And I will say that was a big part of growing up. That was not so positive. But I felt very much alone in it. Was just kind of a constant sense of guilt about not doing enough, about the fact that, I didn't prepare a presentation. I'm kind of just winging it. I didn't read the magazine ahead of time like I was supposed to. I didn't finish all my Bible reading for the meeting this week and I didn't prepare a comment. Yes, I gave a comment, but it was just off the top of my head, and you're supposed to prepare it. It's supposed to be 30 seconds or less, just like all these like little like micro anxieties that you have, just like these tiny little bits of guilt that you're pricked with. It's, it's rarely a huge thing. But there was a lot of that. And then obviously, like when the bloom of youth hit, to use that fun term, when you start, being more experimental sexually and stuff, you feel guilty about that. And that does feel like a big thing because you're told that's something that can ruin your marriage. That's, this is something that Jehovah hates. So I think that that's kind of been something that I've had to process recently, is like, I could never figure out why I had such bad anxiety, because I did have a good upbringing, and my parents were very loving, and they weren't really the ones that were ever making me feel anxious. It was just always, like multiple times a week, you're being told like, are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? And it's impossible to do everything.
Yeah,
By
there's
design.
so many things out there that you could never ever do everything they expect of you, and that apparently God expects of you. So you're perpetually falling short, and then the meetings are perpetually telling you and pointing the finger at that and where you are feeling short. So then you internalize those feelings, and it just again, I felt like I could never be enough, is that's what literally everyone on the podcast says. Everyone that I coach, myself, I felt the same way. It's just built into the system that you can't win this game.
Well, I think like, because I was so reliant on like the hope of paradise to be, cured of illness, it also impacted me, because deep down you're also like, oh, what if I don't make it in? Like, what if I don't feel like I deserve it? I've messed up. And then that was what I always would think about. It's like, oh my God, you know what? I messed up and I gave in to, masturbation or whatever. What if the Great Tribulation starts tomorrow and that's the last thing on my record? Well, then, then I'm not going to make it in. So it was always kind of like hedging your bets, like, okay, well, yeah, I've done a lot in the past, but what am I doing right now? Because if the end comes tomorrow and I'm not doing enough, I kind of feel like all that past stuff doesn't really count anymore. And, there was a notable JW broadcast, just, I think it was like last month or something. And the title of it that was given by the governing body member was like, is your best good enough? And the answer was, we don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's not good enough. And it was kind of alarming to me, because I feel like at the very least you were told growing up, yes, Jehovah, he sees what you do. He knows what your best is, and that's good enough. And like, you wouldn't necessarily always believe it, but you at least hear that kind of platitude. And this was that like took that away. Now it's like, well, actually your best might not be enough.
Well, remember, you can do all the right things, and probably you may be concealed in the day of Jehovah's great anger. So there's always that.
Yes, lots of provisos. Probably, maybe.
Yeah, probably, maybe. I might not kill you.
Yeah.
Might not. Depends on how I feel that day. It really does lend though to a lot of that uncertainty, and you're always trying to please an entity that may not ever be pleased with you. And again, like you said, so you're a ministerial servant and you're a pioneer and you're helping the congregation and you love Jehovah, but you masturbated on Thursday and Armageddon came Thursday night. So I'm sorry, I gotta cut you loose.
I know.
No,
I would lose sleep over that. It's like, now if the end comes tomorrow, I blew it. I just totally ruined it all because of that one little thing. So that was, that really was another thing, was just kind of, there is a bit of a culture of guilt, and, guilting one another, because you would get it from brother so-and-so in the congregation, like, oh, I noticed you didn't underline anything in your watchtower, all these like little things that are very silly, but the totality of them means that you just kind of constantly feel like a little bit unworthy.
And that's where, guilt is, I did a bad thing. Shame is I am a bad person because I did a
Yeah.
bad thing. And everything inside the cult is moralized and a reflection of who you are as a person and your self-worth.
Mm,
So,
yeah.
the fact that you maybe didn't underline your lesson that day
Yeah.
is a reflection that you're just kind of a worthless person. And when you hear that messaging all the time, yeah, it gets into your head and into your heart, and your self-worth just plummets, which is part of the gaslighting that they use to keep you under their thumb.
Yeah. I went through a long period there, I think in my early high school years, like freshman through sophomore, junior year, where it was like I barely slept. I would only sleep for like a couple hours a night, and I would be like up. Just I would go through in my head like everything I had said that day, be it in school or at the meeting or whatever, and just kind of like run through it and just like think like, oh my god, why did I say that? How embarrassing, and just kind of combing through it for the imperfections and just constantly, kind of tallying in my head like all the reasons why I didn't feel like I was worthy, like I wasn't living up to my own standards of righteousness. And that's kind of, what happens is they kind of convince you that like, no, 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 like this is your standard, like this is what you think, this isn't what we're teaching you, this is what you have convinced yourself of. So you don't even have the mindset that's like, you know what, these maybe some people are putting some unfair expectations on me and I can adjust expectations for myself. It's like, no, this is what I have convinced myself of, and this is, what Jehovah wants. And so I am failing to live up to his standard and my own standard. So, it's everything is every little minor transgression is kind of like salvational in nature. It's like everything is kind of a big deal because any little small transgression could be that slippery slope to falling out of the organization or falling out of your personal study routine or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Who are you to question Jehovah and his standards?
That's right.
So you can't question them. You're guilted or shamed for questioning them. Who are you to dare to question Jehovah, aka Watchtower Bible and Tract Society Corporation
Right.
of New York? And so therefore you must be the one in the wrong.
Mm.
Even daring to question that shows a bad heart. And so, I mean, you just feel like garbage every which way you go. They've got you coming and going. It's a really tough scenario there that results in a lot of internalization of this guilt and this shame for most of us, and then it causes a lot of problems in our lives, because sleepless nights and things like that, because you've put in this filter that they've given you and you're trying to run everything through it and to did I do this right, did I do that right, and it's just exhausting. It's an exhausting way to live.
Yeah. And then, when I was appointed, then the weight of a transgression feels that much heavier because it's like, well, I'm supposed to be setting a greater example. I'm supposed to be uh, taking the lead and giving a good witness to all the others in the congregation. So it's you don't even have the excuse of like, well, I'm just a kid, and not that I ever felt like I really had that excuse as a kid, but it's like it's that much more when you feel like I am a representative of Jehovah and I've been appointed by him to this position. So, I started self-harming to a degree. I would not cutting, but I would like bruise myself. Like I would like punch myself like in the legs. Just like whenever I had like a sexual like, thought of any kind, just because it's not only that you can't exercise those things, it's that you're not really supposed to dwell on unclean desires. So if your brain is in the wrong place for too long, and how long is too long, how much what qualifies as an unclean thought, like if you how long does it have to be in your head before you kick yourself for having it, right?
Well, right, and then they ran you down the course of David and Bathsheba, it all started with the thought. He lingered a little too long, mentally, and now he's got people being murdered so that he can have sex with this person. Like, there's this slippery slope mentality that this fallacy that they throw into everything. And then, of course, Jesus said that anyone that looks at a woman so as to have a passion for her has committed adultery in his heart. And, the way they would use that scripture, it was like, then Jesus doesn't know what it's like to be male or female on this planet. Okay. And so, Jesus is kind of missing the mark here a little bit in his statement. Yeah. Because how could you make that statement and understand how humans are wired? Of course, we all have thoughts that come into our head at times. It doesn't mean anything. You can't control all your thoughts. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, it literally is, thought policing and teaching yourself how to thought police. You said that about Jesus in that quote. And that kind of reminded me of like one of my earliest little doubts. And I would have never thought to characterize them as doubts. Something that I've said as an analogy before is that like, to me, it was like a crack in your windshield that's kind of like on the passenger side, and like a rock kicks up and it just leaves this little nick in your windshield, and you notice it at the time, but you never look at that part of the window. So you just you learn to block that out of your periphery. And then every once in a while, you'll check in and you'll see that crack has spread, and you get used to that. You get used to that being your new normal. And then eventually, your windshield shatters. But that's kind of what it felt like to me. Like I would have never even thought like, I have a real doubt about this. It was more like, I don't understand this. But this was an early one that really did bother me for some reason. And it was that, I think of the Revelation book, there's that picture of like Adam and Jesus on the scale that like Jesus had to, balance out what Adam did. And the thing that I guess maybe just being a young romantic who just always, wanted to get married ever since I was a little kid was like, well, but Jesus didn't go exactly through what Adam did because he wasn't tempted by his spouse. It's way different when it's your, first of all, the only other human being on earth trying to tempt you, and the love of your life who is like literally created for you. That's a way different temptation than, I don't know, literally Satan comes up to you and it's like, turn this rock into bread. It's like, that's Satan and you know what he's trying to do. So I was like, I don't think that's equal. I don't think that Jesus actually had to go through the same exact things that Satan or that Adam did. And I really pressed that point for a long time, and I was never able to get a satisfying answer for it. And they were just like, it's the ransom. You just got to trust, the ransom sacrifice.
I have a question for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Since you mentioned that picture, is Eve in that picture?
That's a great question. I don't remember, but I don't think so. I just feel like it's Adam on one side and Jesus on the other side.
That's what I'm thinking too. And this is something I brought up in my original podcast, The State of Your Life, which was just like, yeah, but wait a minute. Two perfect individuals sinned. Jesus was a ringer brought in as God's son. You know what I'm saying? Like they didn't create another perfect human being, right?
Yeah.
They didn't sit down and say, okay, well, let's make Adam 2.0 and see if he can handle it now. No, they brought in God's son who had a pre-human existence to come do this thing. And then it was, I guess a 2-for-1 sale on salvation because people lost their perfection and one supposedly balances the scale. And that's why I don't think, and I somebody, if maybe I'm wrong, I don't remember ever seeing the picture where it was Jesus on one side and Adam and Eve on the other side, because I think I would have, even as a kid, been like, well, wait a minute, there's one person over here and there's two over here. Like, I think that would have registered in my mind, but maybe I was just that blind. I don't know.
No, maybe we're just confirming each other's wrong memories, but no, I think that you're right. And I think it's because, they focus on the through one man sin entered, and then, through one man it was absolved or That's not the right quote, but you know what I mean. So I think that I struggled with the very literalistic reading of things, and I liked reading the Bible, but when it was applied as like literal history and like this literally is a ransom for this thing, I'm like, well, it's not equitable because Jesus saw all the stuff in the Garden of Eden and he knew the stakes, and he knew what his trials would be going into everything. Like, it's just like it didn't really work. And Noah's Ark was another thing for me growing up, specifically um, the water canopy part of it. Do you remember this really weird teaching? This is not a lot of people these days.
Oh yeah, I definitely remember the water.
Kids these days don't know about this, but because it's kind of I think Lloyd Evans calls it like a ghost teaching. It's just kind of like it just fades out. They don't ever say we were wrong about this. We don't.
Oh, they don't talk about that anymore.
They just know. And if you look it up, there's only a couple references, but I do think it's in the Insight book. And I still think it's in the talk outline for Noah's Ark and why we know it's literal history and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, for people who don't know, like the water canopy thing is like, it never rained before the flood. The earth was just covered in this like canopy, this like orb of water. And all of the plants on earth were watered with just morning dew, which even that as a kid, I was like, that's not possible. You can't water a plant with that little amount of water. We had plants outside. That doesn't work. But I remember hearing somebody say that like out in service, somebody described that to me. And I was like, that's crazy. There's no way that that's true. But where does it say that? And they showed in their only proof text was like in the Bible where it says the waters above the earth and the waters below the earth. And I was like, well, they just mean the clouds, right? Because the rain comes from above the earth. And you're like, well, no, it's water canopy. I was like, wait, why do we believe a dumber thing? Why have we invented this crazy dumb thing that doesn't make sense when like there's a more obvious and less silly way of reading the text? So I always had little things like that I struggled with and that I would annoy my parents with for a while until they're just like, listen, they don't even talk about this anymore. So it really isn't a big deal. And the thing that my dad said to me that had an impact on me, he's like, is this a salvational issue? Like, is this particular detail part of Jehovah's plan for salvation for mankind? And, you know, does this have to do with the kingdom? Because that's the key thing. So all these little details, don't worry about that. And that did have an impact on me. Now, of course, the larger picture is only made up of the tiny little details. And if the tiny little details shatter, then, so does the picture. But that did appease me for a while. And I we talked about earlier, because my family was very open and was, I think, more critical or maybe more lighthearted about some of the sillier teachings. I didn't feel stifled by it. I just felt like, okay, well, I'm allowed to have my own take on this. But that's not necessarily the case.
No, I was gonna say you're allowed to an extent, but it's really what he kind of threw at you as a thought stopper.
Yeah.
This salvational. If it's not, just stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's like I remember something that hit me really hard was talking to somebody, and this was near the end of our JW life, and that was, there was a sister who we used to talk to, and she told us, she said that, well, look, in the end, I'm sure it literally stunk to be on the ark, but what mattered was that you were on it. Basically the ark was full of shit, but it was okay because you were on it. And that's all that mattered. And so, like, just overlook everything.
Yeah.
And I just remember, like, for a minute that hit me, and I was like, well, yeah, okay, that's a good point. Salvation is what matters most. But then, it just really shows how everything that we were taught and just everything we did, so much of it was just to save our own behind in the end. We just wanted to be saved and not to be killed.
You just have to hang on to the chariot.
Right. Just hang on for dear life, no matter what it does. And there's just a point where it's like, well, maybe this just isn't what it appears to be at all. how do I even know this is an ark?
Yeah,
You know what I'm
right.
saying? What if it's not? What if I'm just in a stinky zoo? Or what if you got me in like a prison here with with a bunch
I'm just
of
on a prison ship with a bunch of
defecation
crap
and
on it.
yeah. Like what if that's what I'm just sitting in? I'm just sitting in a room of my own filth or something. What is this? Like, you just start seeing that it may not even be an ark.
Yeah.
And then then everything starts to sink, using that metaphor. So then you have the arc sinking. You have these things that end up falling away from you, and we'll kind of get to some of those things later as far as your eventual path out. You mentioned you were a ministerial servant. Tried pioneering, so apparently you got baptized at some point.
I did. That's right.
So when did you get baptized? Was that like in your teenage years at some point?
Yes, I think it was 2007, July 2007. I was a freshman in high school, I believe. I wanted to do that so it would be a protection for me. It would reaffirm to me not to do anything, I don't know, untoward,
So
anything that a
how would you
normal
have been
teenager
then?
might do.
How would you have been in 2007?
I was 14 when I got baptized.
14, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I believe that's right. And yes, I was definitely very nervous about high school. And I was also very nervous about getting baptized. Just because I don't know, both seemed like such big steps. I don't know why. I mean, I was raised in this very prominent witness family. So 14 was actually a little late for me, I think. I had friends that got baptized even younger. And I don't know what it was that prevented me from doing it, but a girl I had a crush on got baptized, and that was what motivated me to do it. Because then I was like, okay, well, I got to keep up with her because she's not going to date me if I'm not baptized. Not that I, thought it was all a load of hogwash, except for the fact that I liked this girl. I believed it was the truth, but that was my main motivating factor, if I'm being honest. And yeah, it did not. Sorry, I kind of had a little brain fart.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like I felt even more separate after getting baptized and going to school, because I felt like, okay, well, now I'm like legit Jehovah's Witness. I've dedicated myself to this. So again, there was even more weight and guilt with every small transgression, because now it's like, oh man, I've made this mistake as a baptized servant of Jehovah. So I remember, like I said, those early high school years really being pretty miserable, if I'm being honest. Like, while I was at school anyway, I just felt constantly overly stimulated. There's all these people, all these friends that I'm not, people that I can't really be friends with, people that want to get close with me, and I can't really explain a good reason why I can't be friends with them. I was never somebody who wanted to like go to like parties and get drunk, because I was too afraid of getting in trouble, getting yelled at. It's my greatest fear in life. But I also, I couldn't really articulate why. I definitely wanted to date. I definitely wanted to have like relationships and sexual experiences. And that was the one really big temptation. And that made me, like, just drove me crazy, because it was like, I know this is wrong, but also everybody I know is doing it and nothing bad ever happens to them. And I mean, what if they become a witness later in life and they got to have all these cool experiences and then they get to be a witness too? Like, that feels kind of unfair. Like, can I just take a 2-year break and just go crazy and go to all the crazy sex orgies and then come back? So I had a lot of those like conflicting thoughts, and then shame about those conflicting thoughts, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's Again, you mentioned the bloom of youth, right?
Yeah,
Earlier.
right.
Like that we even use that term is so ridiculous,
It is ridiculous. Yeah, it's not
like
a
who
real
else
term
says
anybody uses.
yeah, who else says that? But yeah, so you get baptized because you think it's a protection for you, and they tell you it's a protection. Because I remember even sitting down there on the floor, like I just knew, not that I was doing anything wrong. I don't know. It's such a big commitment. And I knew that shunning was in play once I got baptized.
Oh
And that
yeah.
I could never change my mind on anything. And I was locked into this path. And now everything was weaponized against me. And that terrified me. I did know that.
I
Uh,
don't think that I had the wherewithal to think about it in those terms, although I definitely, had the fear of like, but wait a minute, if I'm baptized, then if I mess up, I could get disfellowshipped, and that's scary. But I don't think I ever had the thought of like, I can't ever change my mind. That came later, when I had started to change my mind about a lot of things, and I realized, oh, I'm not allowed to do that.
no, no,
Um,
no. You committed at 14 years old.
yeah. And another thing that I had started to realize, and I realized it years before that, but I had these bisexual leanings too, and that was a big source of like internal turmoil. Like, I'm really not supposed to be feeling this. I'm not supposed to be dwelling on unclean thoughts, even about the heterosexual relationships that I'm hypothetically allowed to have someday. Let alone all this other stuff going on in my head. So that was the start of me feeling very uncomfortable with the society's stance on like homosexuality, um, being spoken of in such degrading uh, terms. That really bothered me. And I think it's because I could put myself in the shoes of somebody who, is only attracted to one gender. And I knew how badly I wanted to get married, and how I had always wanted to get married. And I was like, well, what if that wasn't even an option, but I still had all these crazy hormones that would drive me insane? Like, I already feel so much guilt now. Um, and I was just never really able to get over those feelings. I would go through periods where I could suppress it and just not think about it. But every time the topic got brought up, which was seemingly with increasing frequency over the years, as it became more acceptable in mainstream society,
Mhm.
yeah, it just always bothered me.
Yeah, I could see how that would have really been tough. You're right. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, that was talked about more and more as time went by. My dad was always super bigoted against lots of things, and I mean, like anything that wasn't him was wrong, right? So he
Sure.
was just bigoted against anybody who wasn't him. But he I remember there was like it was kind of scandalous when like Katy Perry had that song I Kissed a Girl and I Liked It.
Oh, yes.
And I remember there was like a talk or a Watchtower study or something right around then that came out or not long after that about how like people are just doing this for attention or try to get male attention or whatever. And it's like, or maybe
Yeah.
that's who they're attracted to, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like it
Maybe it's a big
could be,
conspiracy,
yeah,
or more simply, that's just what they want to do.
yeah, it's more likely a conspiracy.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
eh,
Always. Always.
yes, which is really, it is funny when you look back as Jehovah's Witnesses, we were huge conspiracy theorists.
Oh my goodness.
We thought the
Yes.
government was out to get us. There was a lot of medical conspiracies that went around in the congregations. There were a lot of conspiracies as far as like sexuality or Satan's system coming in and polluting everything and trying to get us to, everything was aimed at. Everything had like nefarious qualities to it, and was aimed at tricking us in some way. And so we were big conspiracy theorists in a lot of ways.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that was something that ended up really um, troubling me, and was kind of the final straw. Was I had just kind of, I guess this is jumping ahead, but it doesn't really matter. Like, around 2016, like many people suddenly got very interested in politics. Like, hey, wait, what's going on? And I was interested in the fact that there had been this rise in conspiracy theories. And so I was just kind of reading about why do people believe this stuff? And I was particularly fascinated by flat earthers because it just seemed like how in, year of our Lord 2016 do we have people that are like back to this flat earth insanity? And like it really gained a lot of traction. And I watched a YouTube video, breaking down not just obviously why the earth is not flat, which I already pretty sure the earth was not flat, but kind of breaking down why people believe these things in the first place. And it made me break down and cry because I realized how many similarities there were in the mindset. And, because it all relies on this grand puppet master conspiracy. And, I just had the image in my head of that tract with who really controls the world, and it's Satan with the puppet strings. And I mean, what more conspiratorial image is there? I mean, that's now what QAnon has devolved into as well. It's just another doomsday thing, and it's all the Satan rules the world and is tricking everybody. And I was like, what's the meaningful difference really between thinking the earth is flat and between thinking this invisible entity invisibly controls the political outcome of every election and specifically targets this one religious group, blah, blah, blah. It's like, there's no real difference other than the fact that I have a lot invested in this one thing being true.
Yeah. And that, it's an interesting, there's a lot of grandiosity to think that me and my 8 million buddies, we and we alone have the one universal truth. We know what everything in the past was and meant. We know what everything in the future will be and will mean. We know what today is and means. We know everything. Everybody else is just flat out wrong.
Yeah.
We have the only truth and everything revolves around us. It's so grandiose. Nobody cares about Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm an activist. I put stuff out there.
It's really hard to get people to care. You find out. I want people to care, and they don't.
There's a gentleman on YouTube that all he does is take. Remember, there was a song. Hey now, I'm an all-star.
Yeah.
Game. I don't know all the lyrics, but by Smash Mouth back in the day.
Yeah.
There's this guy, and all he does is sing poorly songs and like takes whatever, like YMCA or any song, and he sings it to the tune, or he sings Smash Mouth song to those tunes. And it's like all he does. He's just this guy who sits in front of his computer and does that. This guy's got like millions and millions of subscribers.
Oh, I know.
And it's like we're telling human interest stories of people who have been captured in this huge conspiracy, and it's hard to get people to care. Jehovah's Witnesses, nobody cares about you. You're nothing. You just ruined a bunch of lives and you hurt a lot of people, and it matters based on that. But there's no grand conspiracy to get at Jehovah's Witnesses. People care more about Smash Mouth than they do you.
That is literally and sadly true. Yeah, the internet, obviously proves many problems for Jehovah's Witnesses. But I remember being very struck when I first started looking at stuff on YouTube, and seeing that like someone like PewDiePie has like 30 million subscribers or something, and you're like, that's like 10 witness religions, and it's just one guy on YouTube. So
even PewDiePie has more interest than Jehovah's Witnesses. It is funny when you really think about, like you said, about the numbers. This person has 30 million followers or whatever. The numbers get so much larger than what Jehovah's Witnesses have. And I always kind of thought, if this whole thing was a game between Jehovah and Satan, Jehovah might prove that might makes right, because he can destroy Satan and he's got the strength or whatever. But if we believed that Jehovah's Witnesses were the only people who would be saved and the only people that would make it through in the end, then in the end, Satan could say, hey, Jehovah, yeah, you're stronger than me, but scoreboard, because I got more people than you do.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I don't know.
Right.
You can measure your win however you want, but I'm pointing at
Yeah.
the scoreboard here because I got more people than you have Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. We're on the wrong side of the scoreboard now.
Yeah. So you got baptized, you're in high school, you're struggling with a lot of this stuff. You let's say you're going toward 18, right? You're going to graduate from high school. You have decisions to make. What are you going to do?
Yes.
How did that happen for you? And I know eventually you were appointed a ministerial, so I don't know if that happened around that time, but
I was appointed when I was 19, so
okay.
pretty shortly after graduating.
Yep.
But yeah, when it was time to think about school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was really into art. I had always been into art, and I was taking kind of like college prep classes my senior year of high school. And the purpose of the classes were to prepare your portfolio to submit it to like art schools. But I was just doing it for fun because I knew that I couldn't go to art school because, first of all, my parents wouldn't approve. Second of all, it would be out of state. It would be, it's higher education, and it wouldn't guarantee me a job, all of this stuff. I genuinely was worried about getting a job that had good insurance because I do have health issues. And I want to say this is before the Affordable Care Act was passed and you could be on your parents' insurance for a longer period of time. So it was more of like an immediate concern, like, when you turn 19, you're no longer on your parents' insurance. So my timeline might be off. But that's my memory that I had to, I was concerned about like getting insurance and stuff. I really hated school. I don't learn well in that environment. And so I was not eager to go to college, although art school really appealed to me. So my compromise was just going to a community college. And I was going to do nursing, but that was going to take too long for my ADD brain. So I ended up settling for medical assisting, which is more, helping out in doctors' offices and stuff. And that took like 2 years or so. So I was done with college by the time I was probably 20 or 21. And in the meantime, I arranged my classes so that I could lead out like the field service group one day of the week. And, I hit the ground running spiritually. I think you could say that I really did have this feeling at the time of like, oh, wow, I made it out of Satan's dungeon alive. Like I didn't have premarital sex. I didn't do drugs. Whew, that was close, and now it's going to be smooth sailing from here on out. And it was definitely not, but that was my feeling at the time. Like now I can really serve Jehovah.
So much relief just being out of school. Would a nursing school, let's say a 4-year nursing program, would that have been an option? I mean, other than the ADD, would that conceivably have been an option for you? Would your parents have supported that?
They would have supported that. There were a lot of people doing that at the time, and it was just kind of an unspoken, well, we need nurses, everyone needs nurses.
Not in the new system.
Well, I know, right? But, I think even like on a broadcast, like Toni Morris said something about like nursing school is okay. I don't know why, but because it's still a 4-year degree.
And he would decry doctors or lawyers or anything else because you don't need them in the new system. Right. That to show its pointless virtues. But
I think they have too many witnesses that have gone into nursing school at this point that they can't really say no more nursing school. But yeah, that was an option. And I still wish I would have done it, to be honest. I regret not going through with it. But I have to say that was my own impatience. That was not external pressure. Although I definitely wanted to be more active in the congregation and stuff. And I didn't want to be stuck in school. I mostly just wanted to get a full-time job and get out of school. I just didn't like school. So yeah, the higher education thing was just, it's something I think about now. But at the time, I really just hated school and was so excited to be done with it as soon as I could.
Well, yeah, like many, many, many people with ADHD.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So so you then were appointed a ministerial servant at 19.
Mhm.
Um, was it difficult to balance school with all the pressures of being a servant? I mean, different congregations were different. I was a servant at 19 as well. They gave
Okay.
me almost everything in the congregation to do
Yeah.
because I was 19 and I said yes. So,
Yep.
I know it burned me out. What about you?
Oh yes. My grandfather had he would always say never turn down an assignment. And I took that seriously because there was one time when we got to take part in the live action dramas a few times when they used to do those. Now it's all just videos, but they used to be stage productions, in our congregation, and specifically our family got to be involved with a lot of those. And we wanted my grandfather to be the Apostle John in one of them, and he turned it down. And he really regretted it. And it really stuck with me. He's like, I didn't follow my own advice. I never say no to an assignment. And from that moment on, I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to say yes to everything. Always a good choice. Overload yourself, spread yourself as thin as possible. Um, but so I kept really busy. It was definitely hard to, do all that stuff and maintain any kind of like good grades or anything. I mean, I was never like the best student in the world, but I like, college is a little bit more important than high school. It's not like your GPA matters, and like there are certain classes you can only get to with certain like GPAs, especially like in the medical field. So it was definitely really challenging. But what was easier for me was there was no longer the like social pressures because it was a community college. It's not like I was living on campus or anything. And so I didn't really know anybody there. So I never felt super attached in the same way that I was to like the people that I had known since elementary school. So I felt like it was a little bit of an easier time. But then I started feeling more like, well, I'm 19. Lots of witnesses get married when they're 19. That means I can start dating. So I started, pursuing relationships more. And that was also emotionally quite tumultuous, I would say, and led down some not so great paths.
Um, so what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that you just had some relationships that were I mean, look, nobody is taught how to have relationships growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Uh, all we know
Yeah.
is how to control people in cults. We don't know how to
Right.
we don't know how to really be in a relationship with another person. And most people come from a lot of families that have their own dysfunctions and such inside the organization and not allowed to find a lot of healthy things, healthy tools. So,
Yeah, I was definitely just, emotionally immature. And because I wanted to get married, and the only way to do that is to date with a view to marriage, it led to a lot of like really fast moving, serious relationships that didn't go anywhere, which is kind of emotionally devastating. And so that caused a lot of depression and anxiety and like self worth issues because, I just wanted to get to know people, but you kind of can't. Like, you can't just date around. And I developed a reputation for being like this flirt who just dates around. Where it's just like, I would love to marry any one of these people, but I don't know. I get to know them and I don't like them that much. But the only way to get to know them is, Watchtower wants you to like just kind of magically have a bunch of group activities where you just stalk each other and notice each other from afar for months and months on end until you finally start dating each other. But that's not really realistic.
does it really matter if you like them, though? I mean, as long as they're commenting at the meetings and they go out in the field ministry maybe they're even a pioneer. I mean, aren't those
Oh
really the
man.
only qualifications that you need to have a marriage mate?
Yeah, I mean, other than that, and physical attraction, that's kind of it. Yeah, that was my main thing. It was like, this person is hot and interested in me. That's all I need to know. So that's not the best recipe. But I was very fortunate in that I did not get married super young, because a lot of my friends did. And there's that added social pressure of like, my sister, who's 2 years younger than me, and all of her friends are getting married, and I'm an old maid at the age of 22, for not getting married yet. So that culturally, I would say was not great.
Yeah, man, I was
And that was
22. I was 21, almost 22, like 21 and a half, something like that, when I got married. And like, I mean, at 21, it's
yeah,
like, wow, everybody else is getting married. What the heck?
yeah. You gotta put your foot on the gas, man, before
Yeah.
before it all goes away.
You end up with
So
a
I
bunch of
mean,
cats.
yeah, and that was one of the only parts of, at least at the time, that was one of the only parts of the culture that I really did resent. I was like, this is not healthy. Like, I know that this isn't healthy, and I know that this is forcing young people into marriages too quickly. And I know that the only reason I haven't gone into marriage too quickly is because I'm willing to end the relationship if I don't think it's working, which is normal, but I'm being painted out to be abnormal. Not that I was like this pariah. I mean, obviously people dated me, so they weren't that mad about it. But there's a stigma to dating more than one person, because most of
Yeah.
when you listen to any life experience on a broadcast or read about it, it's never, yeah, obviously I had my period of time where I was just dating for a few years before I finally found the right person. No, we met when we were 19 years old. We got married the next year, and that was it forever. Um, and that was not my experience. So that made me feel pretty self-conscious.
I have to
And
ask, where
yeah,
did you get the chutzpah, the courage? Where did you get the courage to say no? Like, this is who I am, and I don't want this. And I say
well,
that
yeah,
because, if you think about it, that is a rare thing inside the organization. I think that's why so many people get married so young. Is, well, obviously a lot of people want to have sex, and that's the only way to do
yeah,
so above board as far as witnesses are concerned. But it's funny, first of all, to think of you as like a player, because
yeah.
Jake, he's a player. He's
Oh
dated
yeah,
like three
you know
girls in the
me.
past 4 years. He's
I
crazy.
mean, for real, that was kind of the story.
But even just saying no, that is a
Yeah.
word that most people have a hard time saying inside the organization. So what do you think it was that allowed you to say, you know what? No, not getting attached to this long term?
Well, now I'll say this, first couple relationships, they broke up with me. So
Okay.
that's a get out of jail
All right.
free pass there. And that was because they felt like, I want to go where the need is greater, stuff like that. Um, but there were a couple that I ended, and it was usually because I saw something unhealthy there. Now, the one got pretty dark. This sister moved into the congregation where I was at, and super pretty, clearly was very interested in me. And I had been, in all these relationships where it kind of seemed like they didn't like me very much. I was doing all the work. So I was like, hey, this is great. This person actually wants to go out with me. And seemed on the surface to be, your typical spiritual sister, so to speak. But very quickly it became um, abusive towards me. Like, the boundaries and saying no wasn't enough. And there was an instance where we were alone, and I basically was sexually assaulted. And I said no. I told her to stop it. I just didn't know how to it's like you shut down and you don't really know what to do. And I walked away just feeling like so confused and so like used, and feeling like it was my fault, because you're told, if some temptress comes up to you, you push her down and you run away like Joseph. And I didn't do that. I didn't even feel like I had that capability in the moment.
And
um
that's I hope that's a normal reaction in such a
right.
instance. The fight, flight, or freeze response. We don't pick how we respond in
Yeah.
those situations. You didn't see
Yeah.
this coming, and it was something that caught you by surprise or caught you off guard.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I found that out,
Sorry that happened.
eventually, but at the time I felt really
Yeah.
freaked out by it. And it wasn't until we had a little bit of, she like happened to go out of town on a trip, and that was the first time that we really spent any time apart. And I was like, what am I doing? This has to stop. And so that was kind of a freaky relationship. But then we were still in the same hall after that, and I had all of this guilt, and I felt like this was my fault. And I didn't go to the elders because I didn't want to have to. I was certain that I would lose my privileges, because there's not a great deal of understanding there, and I didn't want to relive it. I didn't want to drag it up. I knew that if I say something, that's going to drag her into it. We might even have to talk to them together. I don't want to have to relive all that stuff. So I just never said anything. And so then I felt like I'm harboring this grave sin from the elders, that, almost as if I committed fornication, which I didn't. But it felt that serious at the time. And so I would just be on stage, I would be giving a talk or reading the Watchtower, and I would just have these like panicky attacks, like, I just need to get off this stage right now. I'm not worthy. I'm not supposed to be up here. Jehovah doesn't want me up here. And, just end up having like a meltdown after the meeting. And I would just pray about it and pray about it. And sometimes it would get better and sometimes it wouldn't. And the thing that bothered me, eventually it kind of, sorry, to rephrase that, like at first I felt better about it. And then later it kind of made me upset, was like, every time the circuit overseer comes to town, you have a meeting with the circuit overseer, the elders and the servants, and they always bring up pornography because apparently everyone's just, got the spank bank going on as soon as they get home from the meetings. And, but they always bring out this thing. It's like, what, if you cover up, you cannot hide anything from Jehovah. He will bring it out. And they'll always tell some story about how, this brother was hiding his pornography usage from his wife. And then this crazy sequence of events happened and it got found out. Jehovah always reveals these things. And by that point, I had accepted that, what, this isn't my fault. I didn't do anything. But I still didn't want to rat her out and again have to relive all this stuff. So I was like, what? Jehovah will reveal it. It'll come out. And it never did. I mean, to this day, I nobody knows about it, except for like my wife and like close friends who I told about it. So that was something that was hard to reconcile for a while. Was like, why did this never get resolved when it was supposed to be?
I was literally going to ask you a question just as you were talking. Like, did you have those stories going on in your head? Because I remember the one that always, got me as a male who has masturbated in his life, because I'm
whoa.
Oh,
you didn't tell me that this was that
news,
kind of
right.
That you were that kind of person when we started this interview. This is shocking.
Yeah, this is over. I can't do this anymore.
I'm out of here.
Just thinking about that though, like the story that always got into my head was this one where like the brother gets up on stage and is giving a talk, and they said that this brother was giving a talk, and he just like during the talk broke down and just admitted, like in front of the whole congregation, whatever he had done. And so, I'd be up there giving a talk or reading the Watchtower or something. And just in my head, I'm like, am I just gonna like blurt something out here? Like, I've looked at porn.
Yep. Yep. I had those exact same
Oh my
thoughts.
God. Like, they
Yes.
really, really get in your head, don't they?
Oh yeah. Yeah, those are like kind of like scared straight meetings, except
They
it's like,
are. They are.
which is
And
just, it's so, but like at the same time, you're thinking like, okay, well, if it's so important that we come to you and tell you about it, but Jehovah's going to reveal it anyway. Like, why do I need to tell you? Shouldn't you already know by now?
yeah.
I've been a servant for like 5 years and it's been going on the whole time.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking, oftentimes when I'm talking to people on the podcast and a situation like this comes up, it's a woman who was assaulted by a man,
Mm-hmm.
and you had and the women are always seen kind of as like the temptresses, the
Right.
seductresses. No matter what happened, they're always viewed that way. But then, as a man, you're always viewed as like you have the power,
Yeah. True.
right? And so you're expected to also react in a certain way or not react or whatever. Joseph and
Mm-hmm.
his wife, so there's just, they really, Jehovah's Witnesses take situations like this and just make them worse.
Yeah.
They do nothing to make them better. They just make it worse on everyone. It's terrible. And so I'm sorry that happened to you.
Oh, it's okay.
And then that, there's that conditioning and everything, right? That just adds to it on the back end when you're sitting there in a meeting with the circuit overseer and they're having the pornography talk and, all this is coming out. Interesting, right. Though. I find it interesting how you work that into, well, it will be revealed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how did you, so you decided to leave this, I guess, in Jehovah's hands.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly what I did.
And kind of absolve yourself, I guess, of responsibility for reporting it, and that you didn't feel like it needed to come out as far as you were concerned. You didn't have to bring it out. Not that you really owed them anything anyway. I'm not saying that you did, but I'm just saying, within the construct that they have created. So, so did you just kind of go on about your ministerial servant life? How did life progress from that moment when you kind of let that go in a way?
Yeah. It's funny. You interpret everything bad that happens to you as, evidence that you're failing, that Jehovah's Spirit is not on you, and anything good that happens as evidence of something good happening to you, and his blessing is there. So once I ended that relationship, I started to get a lot of more like privileges, and I got to go help with the Warwick World Headquarters build, and got to do a lot of cool stuff. I switched to a congregation that needed more appointed brothers. And so I was able to do a lot of fun stuff there. That was a really fun congregation. And eventually I met my wife there. She moved in. We had met years before and just lost contact, and we just immediately hit it off, and it was kind of love at first sight. So, things were really going kind of great after that. Just had a good old time for a while there. And the only thing that was going on for me in the back of my mind was kind of noting a little bit of discomfort with this increased focus on the broadcast and the videos, the governing body. That was bothering me a little bit. I was a little bothered by the fact that now we basically had Christian rock. We grew up being so snobby about that kind of stuff and being like, oh, can you imagine listening to, Christian rock radio? And now here we are, and we've got these original songs every month. And, growing up, it was like a challenge. You would post to your friends out in service, like, can you name 5 governing body members? And hardly anybody ever could, because they were just so anonymous. And now there they were out in the limelight all the time. And beyond that, I was a little concerned by the like reenactments and stuff. Um, they were manipulative. And I especially noted the ones that were aimed at young people because they seemed to kind of affirm the worst aspects of growing up as a witness. Like I remember being in school and, having maybe like a girl ask you out or something, or flirt with you and feeling all panicky inside and not knowing what to do and thinking, well, this is just me because I'm just kind of an anxious person. But now we're getting like reenactments where, a girl comes up to a young witness in school and we get this, really dramatic inner monologue where he's like, oh no, what am I going to do? My loyalty to Jehovah is being tested. And he goes home and he prays and he does personal study. And, the weight of the world is on his shoulders because a girl flirted with him. And I'm watching, and, dramatic music is playing in the background. And I would watch those things and think, oh, I feel like that would have made me feel so much worse if I was a teenager watching this, because it would have just, just reaffirmed all of these negative feelings that I had. So I was bothered by those things. I didn't dwell on them. I was just like, the videos are cheesy, and just trying not to think about it. But I definitely noticed that I was becoming a bit more disenchanted with the whole broadcasting thing.
I think I left. Trying to think, I left in officially disassociated in September 2nd of 2015 is my anniversary, but I had stopped going to meetings a while before that. Stopped going to anything. I think that maybe it was 2014, the district convention, if that was the international conventions.
Yep.
Yeah, it was 2014. That was the last thing I ever went to. Never went to another memorial or anything like that.
I wonder if we were at the same one. Were you at the Lucas Oil Stadium one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we were at the
My family was in the drama. The last live action stage drama.
Oh, well, so I didn't see that. Because 3/4 of the way through the first day, my wife was in tears. I was like, this is BS. And my wife said, hey, if we leave now, we can beat the traffic. So we left. So I'm sorry I missed your drama performance.
Oh, shoot. Performance of a lifetime.
If you want to reenact it now, we can do that. I can give you opportunity.
It was the live action dramas went out with a whimper, apparently, because every time I tell people that, they're like, was there a drama there? And we're like, yes, nobody remembers it, but we were there. We did.
Oh, really? No.
Yeah, it was not very memorable because some of them, they would make into like movies, like the What is True Love video, but not that one. That one, they just kind of a stinker, I think. Didn't really stick with people.
Well, so 2014 was the first year they had the videos at the conventions. And
it is when the broadcast started.
The broadcast started right around then?
Yep.
Okay. So I can't remember. I'm not sure I was ever really, I knew it was going on. And I just thought, like, I don't know, my whole life we would have made fun of that, like the 700 Club or something. Would have made fun of that to no end. And then to see the governing body coming out and being these rock stars and doing all this stuff, that really bothered me too. That was cementing for me as well. Sounds like we were kind of thinking some of the same things around the same time. It really was a big change to see all that.
It was a big change. And, like at first, I had definitely started to be, and I don't really know why, but just kind of a little concerned about a lot of the dogmatic statements that were made with seemingly no evidence. I was snobby, and my dad was too. Still is, about like public talks. Like we would always convene after the Sunday talk and be like, all right, what'd you think of this guy's talk? And we'd be like, we would always have our little critiques and be snobby about things. And we were always annoyed by people who would just make sweeping generalizations that were, just kind of crazy. Like, Jehovah's Witnesses are the only people that smile these days. Like, what are you talking about? Don't say that stuff. I heard that on a convention one time and was like, this is like for the public. It's demonstrably not true. So I would, I was annoyed with those things. And I had started to notice that stuff in the broadcasts. And it's different when it's just, brother so-and-so who works at the mechanic shop, just giving the Sunday talk. He's just a guy trying his best. And it's different when it's somebody from the teaching committee using manipulative and, just kind of lazy teaching. So I had noticed that stuff, and I just kind of thought, man, we really have an issue in this organization with kind of bad research and kind of bad teaching. I would like to maybe, through my talks, do a better job there. Maybe I can set a good example. One good apple will surely change everything in this huge systemic problem, right? So that was a thing. And eventually sorry, I forget what the original question is, but
we were just
I'll
talking
just transition
about
that into
the things that you just start talking about, the things that were really starting to get to you, what you were
Oh, yeah.
noticing about
Yeah.
all of these different things, from the broadcasting to the videos to everything.
Yes. So
You were starting to become disenchanted.
yes, that's right. And so, unfortunately, just like a couple months after being married, there was a broadcast, and we're on cloud nine. We're super happy. I was 26 when we got married, and she was 27. So we were old witnesses getting married. But it kind of helps, right? Because we both knew each other and knew ourselves really well. We weren't like teenagers figuring out our changing bodies together and stuff. So we were really, really happy. And then this one broadcast came on, and I was showing it at the Kingdom Hall for the older folks who couldn't get it in their homes, or just didn't know how to operate their computers very well. And it was Garrett Loesch, the governing body member, giving the talk, and it was about he started going into rumors and just kind of the generic thing you always hear about rumors. Yeah, don't spread rumors. Then he said, well, what if we hear rumors about the governing body, or people of members of the branch committee? And I'm like sitting up in my chair like, whoa, this is the kind of stuff that we hear about all the time, but we never get to know what people are saying. We just hear that people are saying things. And that did kind of bother me, because I was always like, well, what are people saying that's so crazy that it's just dragging people out? And he says, and because I had been bothered by all these dogmatic statements, I did have in the back of my mind, like, what if this is a cult? Like, what if I'm being lied to? I wouldn't really have any way of knowing. And I apologize. I'll step back one step further and say, like, I want to say it was the first convention that I was even at with my wife as a married couple, there was a demonstration, like a video reenactment, this dramatization of a young man leaving, and it shows him writing a letter of disassociation and like leaving the house, and the parents are crying and everything. Obviously, it's from the parents' perspective of how awful it is when your child leaves the religion. And I watched that and I was like, why? Because it shows the announcement, so and so is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I was like, but that's the disfellowshipping announcement, like when somebody sins. And I had never put together that it's the same announcement, even if somebody just wants to leave conscientiously, just of their own volition. And like while the video is playing, I get out my OD book, the little witness rule book, and I look and it says, yeah, we treat them the same way as disfellowship people. And I sat back in my chair like, so I can never change my mind. I can never leave. And I remember having the thought, like, I'm trapped. And I felt really bad about having that thought because, we're having, it's the convention, it's this nice program. But that was the first time I realized you can't just leave ever for any reason. And I realized in that moment, that I did have a lot of little disagreements, particularly about, LGBTQ issues. And I think I always thought in the back of my head, like, well, I could always just step away. I don't have to sin and become, some evil apostate person, but I could just step away, right? I could just leave. And now I'm like, I guess my own ignorance and complacency. I never read that part of the OD book and never really realized. So anyway, Loesch is giving this talk, and he says, some people have been disturbed by things they've seen on YouTube or Twitter that have been passed around, and quotes can be taken out of context. But if we see these things, we certainly wouldn't want to spread them around to other people and undermine their faith, because Jehovah trusts the imperfect slave. So shouldn't we trust the imperfect slave as well? And it was like my jaw hit the floor. And I was like, that's not a reason. That's an evasive answer. He's just saying, hey, this invisible entity trusts us per what we're telling you. So shouldn't you as well? If you ever see anything about us online, it's not true. And even if it is, don't show it to anybody. Even if you see video evidence of something, of wrongdoing, that's still not good enough. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me.
Well, they know how to take quotes out of context themselves. That's what they do.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Always checking ellipses. When you see the 3 dots, go read the quote and see what they actually said that was conveniently left out of that quote. And so it is interesting that it's kind of interesting that is what hit you, that you could see that what they were telling you to do. So it sounds like you kind of grew up in a family where you were told it was okay to have your own mind and to think for yourself. And now they're telling you, maybe not okay. Maybe don't think for yourself quite so much. Just trust us. Like that quote that floats around all the time that they've made several times about how at some point in the future, we might ask you to do something that seems unwise from a worldly standpoint. But are you going to be loyal to the organization? I mean, it really, this is the kind of setup. I'm not fear mongering and saying they're going to do this, but I'm just saying that this is one of those setups where it's like, yeah, they could break out the Kool-Aid or Flavor Aid, which it actually was, but
thank you.
They could break that out. They could break that out and do the whole Jim Jones things. Not that I think that's where they're going with any of this.
Right. But you can see how that kind of mentality can set in. Yeah.
They've got that trust where you're trusting them implicitly with your life and your decisions, whether or not you take a blood transfusion and just all these other things, right? You're trusting them with everything, and they're using this manipulative language. I really appreciate that you were able to see that.
Yeah. And, well, it's funny that quote you mentioned about, when the end comes, we may receive direction that doesn't seem strategic from a human standpoint, but our survival depends upon us following that direction. I was in Warwick when that, I don't think it's when that article came out, but I think it was the Daily Text, and we had morning worship, and I commented on it about how encouraging it was. And so it just goes to show you, your brain can change so much. Don't discount people when you hear them just kind of spouting the company line and the typical aphorisms that JWs say, because, I read that same exact article and I thought, wow, that sounds cool. That sounds like, it made the Great Tribulation feel very real. And, wow, am I going to have that level of faith? And I just didn't think about it critically at all. But as soon as I heard him say that, heard Brother Loesch say that thing about, Jehovah trusts us, so should you. If you see any videos about us doing something, it's probably doctored. Don't worry about it. Suddenly I thought to that exact same thing that I had once found so interesting and exciting, and I found it horrifying. So I was like, how far am I supposed to trust these guys? When does it stop? Where is the line? And yeah, your mind does flash to that kind of Jonestown thing. Where it's like, well, they say jump off a cliff. Am I going to jump off the cliff? So that was really the start of me really spiraling. But it was another year before it was almost a year before I even told my spouse how I felt. Because I just internally was just like, well, I just feel something's wrong. I didn't have a way to articulate it really, but I just felt like something isn't right. I don't feel connected with this in the same way that I did before. And I feel suspicious of the leadership. And I feel like they might be lying to us, or that I'm being tricked. Maybe they don't even know what they're doing, but I feel like I'm being tricked. And so, I took that very seriously, because now I'm supposed to be a spiritual head. And I have this legacy of this huge family, and my parents, they want to witness grandbaby, all of this stuff goes into your head. So I'm like, well, I'm just going to go back to basics. I'm just going to, pray about this constantly. And just all of my spare time, even when I was at work, which was not good. My work suffered as a result. Like, if I had spare time at work, I was just on Watchtower Online Library or JW.org, just trying to research these little things that I had issues with over the years. I was now suddenly very concerned about disfellowshipping. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Why are we using this? This is a tactic that cults use. Why are we doing this? And suddenly realizing that, like, the reasoning that I had once found so convincing was hitting my ear differently. Like, I was noticing all the things that weren't being said, or that were being said in a way to, maybe appease the public. It sounded like a PR answer as opposed to the actual truth. Um, so I just started, like, noticing all those things, and suddenly I wasn't encouraged by the stuff that I used to be encouraged by. And it was not the Bible, I must say. Like, the Bible, it was weird. I started reading the Bible a lot more because I realized, I never took Bible reading very seriously as a witness, because the Bible kind of isn't your Bible as a witness. Your Bible is the publications. That's what tells you how to feel about the Bible and what to think about it. But I noticed I'm going through this faith crisis. I'm like, well, I should probably read the Bible for once in my freaking life. And so I'm reading it and I'm like, this doesn't really line up with I feel like this doesn't line up. And I don't even know if I believe this, but this doesn't line up with what we're teaching. So just everything seemed wrong. And eventually I just, I started watching a lot more YouTube. Mostly, like, I was interested in, like, a lot of, like, political YouTubers and more like informational stuff. But a lot of them were more like, maybe the creators were gay or trans, and YouTube's an intimate medium, so you really feel like these people. And that was the thing that I couldn't reconcile. That no matter what, I was like, do I really want to be a part of a group that would exclude these people? That would, like, one of my favorite YouTubers, ContraPoints, is a trans woman, and I was like, this is, like, the coolest person that I know exists, and I'm a part of a group that wouldn't let her in, and I don't feel good about that. So that was, I think, the thing that was, like, final for me was, I just, at this point where I was like, even if this is true, I still don't want to be a part of it, because I think it's unhealthy and I think it's cruel. And if that's how God really feels about gay people, then I disagree with him. And he knows that I tried really hard to understand things his way. And, he can take that up with me when the time comes. But it was my conscience. I just couldn't live with myself being a part of a religion that preached stuff like that.
No, I totally feel you there. For me, it was the unhealthy nature and the toxic behaviors and the manipulation and everything that woke me up. And yeah, much like you, look, when I left Jehovah's Witnesses, when I disassociated, I still believed, honestly, in a lot of their teachings. Believed in the Bible. I believed in God. I believed in a lot of things. That's all since fallen apart. But I believed in it. I thought the organization was just extremely toxic. And I just couldn't. I saw how they were hurting people and excluding people, and it just wasn't something that I could stand by. And I think, much like you, it was like, well, look, Jehovah, if this is how it is, I tried my hardest.
Yeah.
And if you understand how we're all made, then you have to understand that I'm doing my best here, but that I'm at a point where I just can't do this anymore. And you wouldn't want me to be somebody I'm not, because I can't fool you anyway, right? So, like, if I go to the meetings and I'm doing all this for false pretense just to save myself, then that already. So this is wasted time. Why am I playing this game? So I've kind of got to do what I got to do. So I understand those feelings. It's a really tough place to be.
Yeah, it's like, even if I don't believe it and I just go through the motions, I mean, that's not any better, because you're doing it for the wrong reasons. but yeah, you're always told these incredible stories about, especially when people are supposedly looking for the truth, and they pray, they give some very specific prayer to God, and then they're like, well, if you're really out there at 7 o'clock on Wednesday morning, I'm going to get a knock on the door, and then, oh my goodness, sure enough, witnesses at the door. You'll hear like all these miraculous stories, or about pioneers who they need money, and we walked out on our front porch and there were $300 in an envelope, that what proof of Jehovah's blessing. But all I wanted to do is understand why I can't treat these people like I can't treat all my fellow human beings equally, and openly not just tolerate their existence, but accept and celebrate them the same way they do me. um but it was apparently wrong for me to expect some kind of miraculous answer to that. But if Pioneer Bob needs his engine fixed, he's going to get an envelope full of cash. So it just kind of felt like, if there was a really good answer to this, and Jehovah is really the hearer of prayers, then I would have gotten the answer. And that's how I felt. And so it was just a long process of finally, telling my wife how I felt, and then,
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. How did you? I mean, I know my own situation with my own wife. I was the one who woke up and
mm,
first and all that. So how did you approach your wife? What was the process like there of and was it eating you up inside, until that
yes,
time? Okay, I would assume so.
yes, it was eating me up inside, and especially because we weren't doing. You're supposed to do family worship every week, and we weren't doing it, and I knew that I wasn't doing it because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to have to go through all this stuff that I didn't believe. And um but that wasn't, the reason that it appeared to be, just, to her, was just that we just weren't doing a good job of keeping the routine. And it was the same thing with service. I stopped being able to go out, and I was just looking for any excuse not to go. um and yeah, so it was just eating me up inside, and eventually it just hit me one night. um we were just kind of having a deep conversation anyway, and I was just like, you know what, I just gotta tell you. The thing that I remember saying is that, and it was true, I was like, I have been really afraid lately. I've been really afraid and concerned at how much of my life is controlled by fear of dying at Armageddon, fear of, if you mess up, you get disfellowshipped and you lose your family. Um, and I just am not comfortable with how much our organization uses fear. And I'm just not sure if I believe anymore. That's my memory of what I said. And obviously, it was a very difficult and emotional conversation. And I don't want to get too much into her, business, because she's still a believing witness.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, but that was a very hard conversation, and um, I wish that I would have been more open and honest earlier. But I also I didn't know how I felt, really, and until I had said it out loud in that moment, I don't think I had really admitted to myself that that's actually how I felt, because you don't let your mind go to that place where you
It takes
actually say, I don't believe anymore.
Yeah, it takes a long time to be able to broach a topic that could completely destroy everything that you have,
Yeah,
everything
and
that you've had in your entire life, generations of things
yeah,
that your family has had. So, it would be totally normal for it to take a while for you to be able to put all the pieces together to be able to broach that topic. It's very difficult.
yeah, and it was just, yeah, it was really difficult. It was hard just to figure out, like, is this really how I feel? And we didn't really have any issues in our marriage other than what I knew inevitably would be an issue whenever I brought that up. So yeah, but it it's been a process. Obviously, now I'm disfellowshipped and we're still together, and it's just been a kind of a long learning process of both of us at first, I think, kind of making the mistake of trying to, save, quote unquote, the other person and trying to pull them to our side. And that's not the right way to go about it. And I think what the journey has just been learning how to respect each other's space and each other's journey, and not trying to persuade the other person, and just, listening, but not necessarily trying to push each other in one direction or the other. And that's been really good. So I won't say much more about it than that, as far as that aspect of things.
Oh no, I totally understand. I respect that. I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Your wife was an active witness.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that that love isn't about. So Jehovah's Witnesses conflate control and love.
Mm.
They see love as controlling someone, and you can only love people who are just like you. A lot of times, it's hard to love people who maybe don't think or feel like you. And I think, real love is being able to love someone and even disagree with them. Phrases like live and let live, or fair enough, or agree to disagree. Right. These are phrases that, allow other people to be who they are. Right.
Yeah.
And they're phrases that I remember when I first started hearing those phrases being like, well, no, you can't agree to disagree. You're just wrong. This
yeah.
puffed up arrogance. And it's like, look, there are people out there who are in marriages who, one is a Democrat, one is a Republican. You talked about politics, and I've got that on the mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
One is a fan of one sports team, one's a fan of a rival team, or you just grew up in different ways. If you read the scriptures about love never fails. Love overcomes all these things, right? So if that's what you believe, and that's what you believe love to be, then why do we have to be the same? We can disagree on these things. That's okay.
I don't know if you've read anything by Dr. Bart Ehrman. He's a New Testament scholar. Yeah, he's a pretty famous guy. And he's an atheist, and he's a New Testament scholar, and a very, skeptical one at that. And I was listening to like a talk he gave, and he said that his wife is like a staunch Episcopalian. And, meanwhile, he's writing books about like how, half of Paul's epistles are frauds and things like that. And they have an amazing marriage. So it's just like, in every other context, it's normal for a husband and wife to have strongly held different but strongly held beliefs, especially about like spiritual things or religious things or political things. So I think that was another thing, especially at first, my own mental hurdle was just like, in every other religion, this is just kind of a thing. This is just kind of normal, and it's really not a big deal. And this is only going to be as big of a deal as we let it be. If we let this be a huge deal, then it will be, because it can be, and it's ruined many marriages. And, I think you could argue that the publications want it to be that way. I think they want the marriage to end. There's a lot of examples of, elders overstepping their bounds and saying, we'll grant you a scriptural divorce because your husband left the organization, even though they're not technically supposed to. So there's a lot of ways that it could have been really bad, but I think we both realized that we love each other beyond faith in this. There's more to our relationship than that.
Yeah, it helps you to not define people by one part of their life, right?
Yeah.
There are people that I don't agree with in different ways, and I don't need to shun them or whatever the case may be. Even in the secular world, shunning exists in a lot of different ways, and I try not to define people by one set of beliefs or one perspective. We're all complex human beings, and we all come at things in very complex ways. It's a lot more than just these, the moralizing things and making conscious decisions out of things. A lot of us have a lot of things that are pushing why we believe a certain way, whatever that may be. So, for you, so first of all, I love that you've ended up in this place where, I don't know, what is it? You see a lot of times, you see, I mean, this is LGBTQ Pride Month, right? And you
Yeah.
see, people with rainbow things that say like "love wins," right? Like, you all are using love to try to overcome this difference, and that can be a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, before then, it sounds like you went through a judicial committee or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
So where love doesn't necessarily win, control often does. So how did you end up leaving, like officially leaving? What was your path out?
Yeah. So, like I said, I did learn that trying to persuade my believing family members was just not going to work. The shutters go up. Every defense mechanism that you've been trained to have since birth immediately kicks into place, and so it didn't matter what kind of logically presented information I gave them, or just objective historical facts about 607, whatever. That stuff just didn't matter. But I still obviously had a lot of feelings. This thing that I dedicated my entire life to, suddenly I have a very different perspective on. And I'm a loudmouth, and I like to write, I like to talk. I'm a performative person. And so I decided to start making some YouTube videos, since I had found those very helpful for me personally. And I was just like, I'll just use my voice. I don't have to show my face. So I just kind of made some videos that, I just talked over pictures, images, stuff like that. A lot of YouTubers I liked did that anyway. And I just kept that to myself. And eventually, I don't know, I had allowed myself enough time, the time between when I started having doubts and when I woke up, and then when I was open about that fact, it was probably like 2 years. So I had a lot of time to come to grips with the inevitability of what was going to happen, and just the fact that shunning is going to happen. It's what happens, and I know that I'm not going to be able to just fake it and lie. And it wasn't feasible, given the kind of family that I have either, because they're, very active, and they're, it dominates every conversation. So it just wasn't really feasible. So, and the more I thought about shunning, I was just like, I'm a millennial who's afraid to show his face on the internet. Like, having a YouTube channel is not a big deal anymore. Like, everybody I know has TikTok. People make videos. It's like what my generation and the generation, below me does now. And yet I'm afraid to do that. I'm afraid that my parents are going to shun me because of a YouTube video. And if that's how like hollow and limited their love is, then I think that kind of just tells me everything I need to know about this group. And once that like a little bit of clarity set in, I just felt like, like, fuck it. I'm just gonna pardon my French. I'm gonna show my face on my channel. And so I did that, and it got found immediately, like the next day.
Whoa.
Yeah, the elders found it the next day.
Do you think that they already knew about it, and that was just confirmation that it was really you?
I don't know. I've gotten a couple conflicting stories about how it was found, like that maybe it was like a Bible study of a family member of mine, or like I don't know. I've gotten some weird conflicting stories. It does seem to me that like maybe they were kind of monitoring the channel and just waiting for me to show my face, and so they could pin it on somebody. Because I got a call or a text from the elders like the next day, and then that just started the whole process rolling. I got very belligerent calls from my mom and dad, And we've had, just nothing but a wonderful relationship our whole lives. And now, my dad is telling me that I've taken a enormous crap over our entire family legacy on him and my mom and my grandfather and everything they've ever stood for, and that I'm weak-willed, that I'm haughty, just all these defense mechanisms just lashing out. And so it's pretty tough. And
No, it is. You see the
I
switch flip.
yeah,
There's a
you really
switch
do. You
that
really
they have that when
hear
it
the
flips, it's
actual.
very ugly.
It's absolutely that's really what it was like. It was like hearing a completely different version of them. And so it almost didn't feel real at first, until they accused me of being brainwashed. And that made me flip out a little bit. I was, that upset me. But, we ended up having one last meal together. They just urged me. They just really wanted me to take the videos down and to go back on everything I said and just pretend, I don't know,
Don't be
shut up,
you.
basically. They wanted me to shut up about how I felt.
Yes.
And
there are a lot of people who are told even like, look, why don't you just walk away and keep your mouth shut? You don't have to disassociate or you don't have to do whatever. Just don't talk about it.
Yeah. Why do you have to say something about it? And to me, it was just like, they're allowed to have a voice. They have a platform where they get to go out and preach what they believe, whether it's writing letters now during COVID or going door to door, but they don't want me to have the same ability just to have a voice to express how I feel, simply because now it's antithetical to what they believe. And so I couldn't just give in to that. So yeah, it was surreal, and it kind of just, everything I thought was going to happen happened. But the really crazy thing that happened afterwards was like, so there was a 2-week period in between when I had the judicial committee and they told me I was going to be disfellowshipped and when that announcement would actually happen at the meetings. And I was going to spend, the week before just going around to my family members and telling them like, hey, I'm going to miss you, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up in the hospital. I was critically ill with my Crohn's disease. I had the worst flare up I've ever had. I was just losing blood constantly through my stool. It was only blood. And I passed out. I lost consciousness and seized while I was in the bathroom. And my wife came in and found me unconscious. And so she had to call the ambulance. They took me to the hospital. I'm losing all this blood. And I ended up needing blood transfusions because I had lost over half of my body's blood volume. And they were like, if we don't give you blood, you're not going to make it. They could barely get me on the CT machine to get my stomach scanned and stuff. So, and we had already talked about that a long time ago because I knew it was a possibility and, I wanted to let her know how I felt. So that was fine. But I was in the hospital for a week and nobody in my family reached out to me. Not my dad, not my sister. My mom did. She came by, but mostly just to reaffirm that once they made the announcement that she would shun me too.
Right.
And
she came by the hospital.
Yeah.
Where you're, for all intents and purposes, dying, potentially, and told you just to tell you to reiterate their stance.
Yeah.
Yikes. I'm sorry.
It was
that is brutal.
Well, it was so surreal. It just kind of didn't even feel real because, I'm thinking
it's
all
not
this
real.
childhood
It's both indoctrination.
Yeah. And that's the other thing is it's like, it's not really them, their minds aren't their own. It's not really,
there is no them. They are
not
Jehovah's
really.
Witnesses. Their identity and everything they stand for, believe, and think and feel is Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah. So, but the other crazy thing is the contrast was, I posted a picture, a selfie of me in the hospital on Instagram. or no, on my Twitter, and an anonymous ex-JW started a GoFundMe for me to help with my medical bills. And so while I'm laying there, none of my family is contacting me. I'm getting all of these well wishes and like wonderful charity from all these complete strangers. So it was just kind of this amazing contrast of like, it kind of reaffirmed everything to me. I was like, well, you know, my family is treating me like I am dead already. And meanwhile, all these complete strangers are just happy that I'm alive and well. So, you know, and all of that was just, the week before they were going to announce that I was disfellowshipped. So that's all still pretty recent. Yeah.
Can I ask? Oh, so when did this occur? How recent?
I think that was just a month ago now.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
Very fresh. Do you, I mean, this seems like a potentially obvious correlation and potential causation. But you can tell me, I'm not an expert on Crohn's. Stress exacerbate that? I mean, the stress of all of this, is that what nearly killed you?
Oh, I think it's a big part of it. I mean, my symptoms had gotten so bad since I had woken up. And there was the inevitability of what was going to happen. And so part of me wanting to leave was a little bit of just like, I feel like I'm going to die if I keep trying to push through this and just keep everything bottled up and, pretend. So that was definitely a lot of it. And, it's not healthy growing up being worried about that stuff either. As a little kid, being aware that might be a thing that has to happen. So I think a lot of stress ended up causing that stuff. And there were a lot more issues than that that they found, internally and stuff. But I think as a trigger for the symptoms, I think absolutely. And I've been improving and feeling a lot better since. I mean, I'm still, working on getting my strength back up. But yeah, I've been doing a lot better.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thanks.
Goodness, it just the toll that Jehovah's Witnesses take on human beings, on families, on humans. It sounds silly, but I don't know. Let's just say this. Before I found out the truth about the truth, I could eat ice cream and have lactose and cheese and things like that. I can't eat it anymore. I don't know. I don't claim to know all the mechanism behind it, and people can believe whatever they want around it. I've read some things about it, and it doesn't matter. I can't have it anymore. Okay.
Right.
Without getting pretty sick. I am now very, officially lactose intolerant. I was not before the massive stress of finding all of this out. I mean, I always had some stomach issues. I think a lot of people who are Jehovah's Witnesses, the anxiety and such causes a lot of that, a lot of stress anyway. But that period of time, I mean, there's definitely a before waking up and an after waking up. Those bastards ruined my ice cream.
I'm also lactose intolerant, so I know the struggle. It's devastating.
And I know that lactose intolerance pales in comparison, with the lifelong struggle that you've had.
Oh no.
We all have our problems, right? In different ways.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not a competition.
I couldn't let that not be said, or at least broach that part of the topic, because the severe psychological pressures that people are put on to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And then if you start to see the cracks and you start to see that things aren't what they seem, it's tremendous anxiety and pressure that I don't think most people will ever know what that feeling is like, because most people will never have to leave anything that has that amount of psychological pressure along with everything else attached to it.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's it's not healthy. And I think just so many on the surface, everything appears very glossy and healthy. You know, what's wrong with it? It's just a bunch of people, you know, being happy and going door to door. But it's just all these little small things that add up, create a lot of anxiety. And I think if you're already prone to those things and already maybe have some issues, it can really exacerbate them. And especially the journey out, you know, yeah, like you said, there's just nothing like that psychologically or physically. I mean, stress does crazy things to people's bodies. I mean, yeah, I don't even know what to say about it other than I've never been that sick before. And I don't think I ever will be again. I think
I certainly hope not. I hope
yeah,
not.
I hope not too. But yeah, yeah, definitely doing a lot better.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm glad to hear that you're doing better physically, but also, you know, mentally, emotionally a little bit after leaving. It sounds like that's been a release of some pressure.
Yeah, I think it just makes things a lot simpler. You know, you're not in that limbo of um being physically in but mentally out. That takes a huge toll as well. Um, it's the reality for many people, and all of us are in that spot for a certain amount of time. But it definitely is not a psychologically healthy place to live for an extended period of time.
It's not. It's not. I mean, look, you know, kind of referenced this earlier in a way, you know, where your family said, you know, hey, like, take this stuff down. Let's just not, you know, you don't have to talk about it, right? Like, it's almost like a person that grooms someone and abuses them and then says, of course, you're not going to tell anybody what we do, right? Well, you're
Right.
not going to tell anybody what's really happening. And so then, you know, because we've all been at a minimum spiritually abused, you know, like religious trauma syndrome, things like that.
Right.
That's at a minimum. There's been a lot of mental and emotional, at times physical and sexual as well, abuses. But so at a minimum, our abuser has told us not to talk about it. But then there's also the aspect where, oh crap, my ADD brain just
Story of my life.
but there's also the aspect, so you're not supposed to talk about it. But people who try to keep up the charade, they're basically going and visiting their abuser, whether it's on a Zoom meeting, whether it's in a Kingdom Hall, whatever the case is. You're basically going and putting yourself back into active abuse to some degree, and that keeps people really hurt and stuck. And it's very hard to recover while that, you know, it's hard to fill a hole while digging out the bottom of it at the same time, right? You know, it's a very difficult place to be. It's very harmful.
Well, I think even in the best of circumstances, you know, let's say you don't have any doubts and you just think it's the best thing ever, you know, you're still getting emotionally abused, but you just don't realize it. You're internalizing it. And the extent that you feel those things, you think it's your fault. So even in the best of circumstances, that stuff is still happening. But yeah, I definitely had that feeling where I was like, well, I can just go and sit and be supportive, and couldn't do it. I mean, it was just, I didn't realize how triggering it would be, and just how every little thing, you know, brought up memories or, you know, just triggered some negative feeling that I had. And, you know, thankfully for me, at the point where it was kind of reaching a breaking point, they switched to Zoom meetings, and it was like, okay, well, I'm at home at least, right? And we don't have to turn the camera on. So I kind of, not that anything about COVID is lucky, but in terms of that very narrow circumstance, that kind of worked out for my mental health. Yeah.
So today, I mean, you've only been out a month.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, I don't know, have you had any perspective shifts? Is there something that you want to do? Also, I know you have your own channel, and I know that you like you recorded your judicial committee and things like that. And so there are things that are out there that others might find interesting in listening to your story.
Sure.
So kind of what are you up to today? Where do you hope to find your life? Where do you want to go with your newfound freedom, even though unfortunately it cost you dearly?
Yeah, I think that the biggest perspective shift has been that I find that I'm far less cynical now. Um, I was just always known as a cynical person, and
Yeah, me too.
my dad is the same way, my grandfather's that way, and not that they're not also very nice people who believe in this hope for the future, but when you also believe that everything is being run by a Satan and all of mankind's efforts are futile, that there will never be any true solutions to any problems, and that anything you do to try and fix things will fail. That's a really negative mindset to live in. And now that I don't have that mindset, I find that I'm just, despite things being very tumultuous right now, like feeling really like hopeful and feeling very confident in the goodness of people. And I did not feel that way before. I think I definitely felt like there was a natural evilness to people or an evilness to society or whatever. And I don't feel that way anymore. So, I mean, I think that's probably the biggest perspective change, that I just find myself much less dour about everything. And then, yeah, I have the YouTube channel, which is called AltWorldly. And yeah, I mostly just talk about, I try to focus on things that haven't been talked about like a million times. So I did one on like Watchtower's contradictory stance on predestination. That's something that was really interesting to me. When I was, a believer, I had trouble with that. And so I just kind of try and line up all of the current light, so to speak, and kind of line it all up and show how it contradicts itself. So I like more like esoteric things like that. My goal though is I really like doing that stuff, and you know how it is. You get some nice comments and people tell you that what you're doing is helpful. It's an incredible rush because you still have that desire that you had as a door-to-door preacher to help people.
Only now you actually get to help someone.
Yeah, that energy, yeah, has to go somewhere. So I still try to direct it that way. And I also, my goal now that things are opening up is to try and do actual like volunteer work in the community. And focus on creative stuff. I never pursued my dreams of like, I've always wanted to write like a book for like young readers. I never did it because I was afraid it would stumble somebody, or I'd be seeking great things for myself. And now I'm like, I should seek great things for myself. Why not? So I'm just going for it. So yeah, I'm just trying to do all the kind of like creative stuff that I always wanted to do but couldn't really.
So are you going to explore art in a new way, creatively along with that?
Yeah, I right now, like I'm kind of focusing it on like doing illustrations for this like kids book thing. So that's kind of been, which is also really ironic because when I was I would terrify my parents with these really dark, morbid drawings, and they would think like, "What's wrong with you?" And it's really crazy. Like when you look at stuff that I would draw, it's all like faceless people in business suits, like getting their brains taken out and stuff. Like it's all like clearly weird allusions to like brainwashing and stuff. And I just like my subconscious expressing itself. And now that I, am more mentally free, I'm just drawing like cute drawings of like animals and stuff, well, creatures. So yeah, I'm trying to direct it towards this kind of project that I'm working on. And I don't know if I'll ever see the light of day, but it's been a good positive outlet.
That's awesome. I love seeing people be able to reconnect with because look, we all have this story from the past. A lot of people want to just throw it away and not look at it. The reality is you're gonna have to look at it at some point. You can't run from it. It will drag behind you everywhere you go until you make peace with it to some extent. But also, I like that you can look back and see, oh, there was a little me who enjoyed art. And so that was something that I was passionate about and that I got something out of. So how can I go back and do an autopsy on the past, find some of the things where I was being present, and you can see some things about me and learn those things and then take those things into the present and on into the future. So something like art, if that's something that you really love, I mean, art is such an intimate way of expressing yourself. And so now your art might be a little bit different, but you still get to express a part of your personality through it. I just think that's wonderful, that people get to find those parts of themselves again that were lost.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, it's cool. Anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to, or any parting words, anything you'd like to say?
I don't think so. As far as parting words go, the generic "it gets better" advice is really true. And, I found so much comfort in listening to your show and shows like this, like Mormon Stories, I really like. And there's a really good one if there's anybody that's in mixed faith marriage, like maybe someone is PMO and their spouse is still a believer. There's a Mormon podcast called Marriage on a Tightrope, and it's hosted by an ex-Mormon married to a current Mormon, and they just talk through how they've been able to make their marriage work. And I found that really, really helpful. But you're going to get, if you engage online, you're going to get a lot of opinions. Everybody has their own takes on things, and don't take any of those things as gospel. You do have to go on your own journey. And I'm always surprised at how negative some of the comments are about the outlook, especially on like someone's marriage or, their family, if they're young and they're living at home. It's never as bad as you think, because if you're listening to this, you've kind of already gone through the worst part of it, which is like just allowing yourself to access a different part of your brain. And that is so scary. And once you've done that, you can do anything. That's how I feel, to the point where even when I was laying in the hospital, I was like, this still kind of isn't as bad as like that initial jolt awake of like, oh my God. Yeah. So that was not a super coherent parting word, but that's, I don't know.
Well, I will say that I appreciate that, because I think that, and I'm not going to go into all of them, something I often do in my coaching practice, but one of the things that, look, everybody who has left a cult has done something massive, okay? And it shows a lot about you. A lot of us walk away feeling, again, the remnants of I'm not good enough, the self-esteem, the self-worth issues, all these different things. But you and I and most of the people listening have done something that most people will never do in their life. Most people will not necessarily live inside a cult, day to day.
Right.
Most people are not going to have, think about it. There's 8 million witnesses today. Most of them are never going to leave.
Yeah,
okay?
That's true.
It takes a tremendous amount of intellectual and emotional honesty and authenticity, just all these different beautiful qualities that can be seen in just the fact that a person would leave and then have the courage, which is not the absence of fear, but feeling the fear and doing it anyway, the courage that it takes to then look at something that where you stand to lose everything. Like it's so badass for people to be able to stand in their own selves, their own brains, their own heart, and be able to assess all this stuff. So anyone that has done that should feel a sense of pride in doing that because it's very difficult. You just did something that most people can't do.
Yeah. And, if you are a creative type, you have the most insane and specific life experience a person you couldn't pay for that. That's the hardest thing, is to find life experience you can pull from, and you're never going to run out of it now. You have an incredible source of creative inspiration.
That's very true. Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story, your personal experience with all of this, and being so open and honest about it. Because that's for so many of us, we felt alone for so many years, or you start to wake up and learn the truth about the truth, and you're like, oh my gosh, am I the only person that sees this? When you share these things. I mean, heck, there's probably people, I'm sure you get this on your channel. I'm sure there's someone who's going to listen and identify with this just because they have Crohn's disease.
Yeah. I have gotten that a few times. That's kind
And
of cool.
I get a lot of messages from this JW life because I talked openly about my struggles with ADHD
Mm,
and how that played in. And you've talked about it here too. So, these are things that people can identify with, and these are just human things. Again, all these stories, they're not just ex-cult stories, they're just human stories. We're just people that
yeah.
went through a specific type of circumstance and experience. So I appreciate you sharing yours.
Thank
And
you.
and I think that it'll help some people out there.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me. It's been an honor to be on the show.